everybody, to this week's RfRx. I'm Kara Griffin. I'll be your host this evening, and it's just me being your host this evening because, as you may have noticed from the ad for this week's episode, several familiar faces are going to be here as guests for our panel discussion this evening. So I am super excited to get to chat with all of them and all of you as well. So I guess we'll just get right down to it rather than having banter back and forth with myself and myself. So I would rather hear from all of you fine people, and we can do that with our opening poll, which we will get launched here for you. And I'll go ahead and read the questions off for people who that might help. The first question is, do you think that the recent attempts to limit or eliminate access to reproductive health care in the United States and in other places are primarily driven by religious belief? The answer choices are yes, no, or I don't know. Question 2, have you been personally impacted by the recent US Supreme Court ruling that overturned Roe v. Wade? The answer choices are yes, my access to reproductive health care has been limited or removed. I have been impacted in some other way. I am afraid that I may be impacted in the future. No, or I'm not sure. And then the third question, do you live in a country or state where abortion bans are currently in place? Answer choices are yes, partial bans, no, or I don't know. So we'll give y'all a few minutes to put your thoughts in there, and we might come back to look at those results later on during the show. So while you're doing that, I am going to talk a little bit about what it is that we're doing here. What is RfRx? Well, I'm glad I asked. RfRx is a weekly online show where we have guests who come on to discuss topics that might be relevant for folks who are here in RfR. And it's, of course, not meant to be a replacement for our online community or support groups, but it is meant to be a complement to those communities and a place where we can hear some good advice and coping skills and just learn new things from our really interesting guests that come and talk to us. And if you have any topical questions, comments, inquiries, we do take death threats as well. You can send those over to us at RfRx at recoveringfromreligion.org. And if you want to catch up on previous episodes that you might have missed, you can find the recordings on our YouTube channel and also our podcast. So I put the YouTube link there in the chat too. So I've mentioned RfR a couple of times. For those of you who maybe haven't been here before, you might be wondering what that is. So RfR stands for Recovering from Religion. And our mission statement here is to offer hope, healing, and support to those struggling with issues of doubt and non-belief. And we do that primarily in 3 ways. We offer hope, healing, and support. And so to start out with, healing, what do we mean by that? Well, primarily, we offer that through our helpline, which is a 24/7 helpline that's available either online through the chat feature on the website or over the phone if you prefer that. And that is where you will get in touch with a trained agent who is standing by to take your call and not try to sell you anything. They're actually just going to listen with an empathetic ear. They're not going to be judging or criticizing, but it's somebody you can talk to about what these issues might be that you're going through to do with religion or doubt and non-belief. And they will listen to you, not try to preach to you or deconvert you or convert you to something else or anything like that. They may direct you to some resources if they notice that there may be some that could be helpful for you. They'll recommend them. Or if you would like to just go straight to our resources page on the website, you can check all those out yourself. We have a huge library of resources on all sorts of topics, and we try to keep those curated so that it's articles and links and things that people have found helpful about, topics that come up a lot. So definitely feel free to check that out or call or chat into the helpline. And then, so the other thing that we offer is hope. And the way we do that is through our blog and our podcast. And the idea behind that is just that it's a place to share and listen to other people's personal stories and kind of feel that sense of we're all going through this together. Everybody's story might not be exactly the same, but you might hear something from someone else's experience that inspires you or gives you hope or makes you feel like, oh, okay, well, if they went through that, then, that makes me feel a little bit better about my situation. That's the goal anyway. But feel free to check those out and see if any of those speak to you. We have the link to the blog and the podcast here that I'm dropping in the chat. So definitely look at those. And then the third part of the mission is support. And we do that in a couple of ways. The first thing that we offer is peer support groups. And those are in-person meetings. Well, okay, they're face-to-face meetings. They were previously in-person pre-COVID. Then we went virtual. Some of them are transitioning back to having in-person again, but they are also still continuing online. So you can still attend the support groups virtually if that's where you're comfortable. And, kind of the nice thing about that is you don't have to attend the support group that's right in the place where you live. You can attend any of the support groups that you want. Maybe the one in your city meets at a time that isn't convenient for you, but the one halfway around the world is at exactly the right time for you. Well, then go join that one. We actually have more than 60 different groups around the world, and we're always trying to start more. So find the nearest one near you, or the farthest one from you. I don't care. But here's the link where you can check that out on Meetup. And if that sounds like something you would like to participate in, by all means, check it out and go get you some peer support. Now, sometimes we have things going on that maybe peer support isn't quite going to get it. Sometimes we want to talk to a professional. And so that's why we have the Secular Therapy Project. And this is a way for you to connect with a licensed secular mental health care provider. Now, all of the other previous services that I described are provided by trained volunteers, their peer support. But this one, the Secular Therapy Project, this is with a licensed mental health care provider, and they are all carefully screened to make sure that, one, they have appropriate licensing in their state and or their country, that they maintain a secular practice, which means they're not going to be proselytizing, they're not giving you any, religious, spiritual kind of advice, telling you you need to go home and pray about it or anything like that. And they exclusively use evidence-based treatments. They're not going to have you, buy a bunch of crystals or, anything like that. It's all evidence-based. So you don't have to worry about getting strange advice that makes the situation worse. So seculartherapy.org. Check it out if that sounds like something you're interested in. And you can go on there and kind of sort through and find a person that's near you or specializes in what you're interested in and all that. There's a whole database of them on there, so you can select one that sounds good for you. Okay. Also, we have our online community. We're big on community here. So this is our online platform where you can join if you are, deemed somebody that might be a good candidate for the online community. You can call in or chat into our helpline to talk to an agent who will get you plugged into the online community. They'll ask you a few questions, see if it sounds like a good fit. And if so, they will get you plugged into the online community where you can join all sorts of channels. We have channels for practically everything. If you are a former Jehovah's Witness, or you are a ex or current military member, or you're a member of the LGBTQ plus community, or you're trying to figure out about secular parenting, or whatever your situation is that you're in, we may have a community channel with other people who are also dealing with that, and you can get plugged in with other people and have conversations and get support that way. So we also have weekly Zoom meetings. So maybe you miss having, regular get-togethers at a church group that you used to go to. Well, I'm not saying this is exactly the same thing as that, but we have weekly meetings. I think some of them are on Sundays, in fact, that you can join. And in addition to that, now that's, like I said, not open to the public. So we try to make sure there's no trolls or anything like that. That's why there's the screening process to get added to it. So in case you don't want, everybody in the world knowing you're a member of that community, that's fine. But if you want to join more out and open atheist community, our friends at the Atheist Community of Discord have a lovely Discord server that you can hop onto. And we are currently streaming, as we do every week, onto the Discord. So there's the link for that if you want to get plugged in with those folks who are also very cool, can confirm. Okay, they're not as cool as Helen, because Helen is 20% cooler, but I mean, I don't know, it could be neck and neck. Go there and find out. And then finally, okay, the last thing I'm going to talk about is volunteering. This is a 100% volunteer-based organization. All of the services that I just talked about are staffed by volunteers. Nobody is getting paid anything for this. And we are always in need of more volunteers. And the great thing about that is that that can actually be another way of finding healing or meaning for yourself. I know to me, it's been very meaningful. I have enjoyed it quite a bit. And for some people, it's really a nice next step when they start, feeling like, hey, maybe I can actually give back too. Well, you can. And maybe some of the services that I described earlier sounded like something you'd like to do. Maybe you would like to be a peer support or a helpline agent or any of those things. Maybe you're a licensed mental health care provider and you'd like to be a part of the secular therapy project. That's not volunteer, but any of the things that I mentioned, but also other things like operating the technologies. We do Zoom meetings and things like that. We need project managers, all sorts of stuff. If you have skills, we can probably use you. So feel free to check us out on our website, recoveringfromreligion.org/volunteer, if you're interested in learning more about that. And I bet y'all are getting tired of hearing just me talk. So what do you say we get down to the actual show that we came here for? And as always, for those of you that may not have been here before, the format of the show is generally the same. We'll have discussion for about an hour with our panelists, and then we'll go to the Q&A for about 20 minutes. Now, in order for us to have the Q&A, we need questions. So while the discussion is going on, if you have a question for any of the panelists or all of them, type it into the chat. And we may not get to it right at that second while they're talking, but I'll be collecting them. So that when we get to the Q&A, we'll have questions to ask them. So it helps if you start your question in the chat by typing the word question and then writing your question so we know that it's intended for them. So feel free to do that as we go along and also at the end. Let me introduce our guests this evening. We have starting out with us, Dr. Darrel Ray, who is the founder and president of Recovering from Religion. He's been a psychologist for over 40 years and is the author of 4 books, including The God Virus, How Religion Infects Our Lives and Culture. We have an episode about that one. And Sex and God, How Religion Distorts Sexuality. We also have an episode about that one. Dr. Ray has been a student of religion most of his life and holds a master's degree in religion, as well as a bachelor's degree in sociology, anthropology, yay, with a doctorate in psychology. And next up, we have Gayle Jordan, who is an estate planning attorney and former Southern Baptist who left the faith years ago when her then teenagers began asking questions she could not answer. Her research led her and her children into the light of reason and rationality. And years later, she still feels the effects, both positive and negative, of that dramatic shift in perspective and attitude. And it's this sympathy and compassion that drives her to reach out to help others navigate the emotional and physical process involved in leaving one's faith. And she serves as the executive director here at Recovering from Religion. Then we have Helen Greene, who many of you probably already know. She has a degree in psychology. A lot of psychologists here from the University of South Florida, works in human resourcing, and is an LGBTQIA+ advocate. She also enjoys spending time with her hubby and kids, loves sci-fi and horror movies, and is a huge Tolkien nerd. Yes. She serves as support group leader and ambassador for RfR, in addition to frequently co-hosting RfRx, where many of you know her from. And then finally, we have David Teachout, another fan favorite. He's a mental health therapist and photographer focused on teaching how creativity intersects with mental flexibility and working through the inevitable difficulties in life. David grew up as a Christian fundamentalist, attending Bible college and receiving a bachelor's degree in theology and psychology. During his studies, David deconverted and has been on a journey of more deeply appreciating the many nuances of humanity ever since. David has a master's degree in both forensic psychology and counseling psychology and is currently at work on a doctorate in clinical psychology. David has been actively working within the field of psychology as a therapist, social worker, advocate, and subject matter expert for over 15 years and a frequent guest on our show as well. So welcome, everybody. I am so excited to have y'all. Also, we have one of our other support online community leaders with us here in the chat. She goes by Joy Us or Joy US, and she will be interacting in the chat as well, but not on camera. Okay, so what are we doing here tonight with all these people? Well, briefly, just for anybody who has been living under a rock and doesn't know, in June of, or who may not be involved in these issues or does not live in the United States. No judgment. But in June of this year, the US Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, which was a decision they made in June that revokes the federal constitutional right to abortion. This protection had been in place since 1973, but now several US states have already begun implementing laws restricting or eliminating access to reproductive health care for people who can become pregnant. And this has been driven largely by the religious right wing and is part of a larger platform that has been stated to include other things such as reducing or eliminating access to birth control, gender affirming care, marriage equality, and so on. So we are here to discuss what's going on with this, what it has to do with religion, and what RfR is doing in response. So without further ado, let me turn it over to start with to Dr. Ray. Would you like to start us off with some comments on that?
So I want to start off by putting a framework around this. Because I lived through some of this stuff, and very few people have. So I hope that when I give my little 10 minutes here, you'll have a perspective of why this has become such a big deal. And whether you live in the United States or not, I think most of us, there's pieces of the history that we could plug in here. I grew up in Wichita, Kansas, and to keep that word Kansas in mind, if you're from outside the United States, it's right smack dab in the middle of the continent. And during that, it's very conservative, it's very Republican. We have a super majority in our legislature at this point in time. But growing up in Kansas, it's always been conservative, but it's remarkably liberal in some ways. I was going to high school in Wichita in the I graduated in 1968. And I remember throughout my high school, from the time I became sexually aware and then later sexually active, I was about 17 when I became sexually active. There was always talk about abortion. It was like people were whispering, oh, she had an abortion, or her father's a doctor and he gives her abortions. It was really interesting in that high school time, 1968. This is before Roe v. Wade, which happened in 1973. But it was kind of a common secret. And nobody was ranting and raving from the pulpit about abortion. There was no churches out there with signs or crosses or anything. There was several abortion clinics within an easy drive of where I lived in Wichita, but we didn't have any in Wichita that I recall anyway. So this was like, that's the environment that I grew up in. It wasn't a big deal. Now, people weren't out in advertising, and there was some whispering and there was some shame about it. But one of the main Baptist ministers in the whole town, it was kind of like the head of our whole congregation, or not the head, but the leader of all the other ministers. His daughter had an abortion and everybody knew about it. It didn't stop her from participating in the church. There were some people that were tut-tutting, and shaming her about it, but it wasn't gigantic. It didn't ruin your life. It didn't make you feel terribly guilty and shamed. Now, I can't speak for that particular woman who had an abortion from that minister's daughter, but I did know a lot of women and girls in that time frame who had abortions. And if you can imagine, it wasn't something you talked about, but it was something that was kind of known. The churches didn't encourage it, but the Baptist church at that point in time, Gayle being an ex-Baptist, Baptist church even had an affirmative statement in whatever their governing documents were back in the 1970s. So even churches weren't against abortion, and even Baptist churches weren't against it. I got married in 1970, and of course, we were sexually active before we got married, literally sexually active afterwards, but we were very well educated about contraception. We did all the right things, and yet we still got pregnant. So in 1971, we did a little research. We found an abortion clinic up in Kansas City, which is 200 miles from where we lived. And we decided to drive up. We didn't tell anybody we were doing this. We just drove up to Kansas City. We went through a very quick screening process. About the only question they asked was, does this affect your mental health? And she said, yes. So, okay, come on in. And she got the procedure done. It was a medical procedure. I mean, She didn't feel great afterwards, but she was back to normal within, say, certainly within 48 hours. I'm not saying it was easy. I didn't go through it. My wife did. So I can't say much about her experience there. But I know there was some residual shame on her part because her parents were very, very conservative. However, we both looked at it and said, we're in college. We want to get our degrees. A baby right now would blow both of us out of the water. So we just made the decision, we're going to have an abortion. We'll have children later. 1975, we had our first daughter. 1979, we had our son. And no big deal. It was that common. It was that easy to go through life as a college student who had had an abortion and then continued with your education. Now, 1973 comes along and Roe versus Wade comes out, and which makes abortion legal across the whole United States. At that point in time, it had just been kind of hit and miss. There were some states that are more restrictive than others, but it was still pretty common throughout the United States. But I want to repeat, there were no churches with crosses in their yards, no ministers preaching from the pulpit against abortion. It just wasn't happening. I'm in one of the most conservative states in the nation, and I don't see any of it. So what I did see was during the 1970s, especially in the 1980s, I saw a rise of the guilt and shame. The churches started preaching about abortion. Not all churches. It started slowly. It started mainly in the evangelicals and Baptists. In 2012, right about the time I wrote my book, Sex and God, I was at a place where there were a whole group of Planned Parenthood. It was like a Planned Parenthood convention or conference in the same hotel that I was at. And I got to walk around and talk to all these Planned Parenthood people. And when they found out what I did, what books I had written and all, they basically said, we'd be out of business if the evangelicals weren't getting abortions. It was like so common. Everybody gets an abortion in the evangelical church, but at the same time, they preach against it. That was the first time I'd heard that. And it wasn't like I heard it from one person. It was like everybody in groups were saying, yeah, we ask about your religion when you come in, and we get tons and tons of fundamentalists and evangelicals. So fast forward to 2022, and Roe v. Wade gets overturned by this incredibly out of touch Supreme Court. But it's a Supreme Court that was the judges were put there by fundamentalist evangelicals, people who are committed to their Christian religion and imposing Christian ideals onto the rest of the nation. Mind you, that same court didn't have these ideals back in 1973. That is how much has changed here. They overturned it, and Kansas, my home state where I live and was born, Kansas happens to be the first state in the nation to have a proposed amendment to the Constitution that would basically outlaw all abortions. And so my partner, Barb, and I, but I'm going to give Barb the lion's share of the credit, decided she's going on a rampage. And she went out, she was protesting almost daily with her cohorts and other groups all over the state, from Topeka, all over this part of the state where I live, and in Leavenworth County where we live. And they were even organizing bikini protests where she and some of her other female friends would stand out in front of the courthouse with their, vote no signs and in their bikinis and try to offend all the Republicans that drove by. Anyway, it was just, they had fun with it, but they were dead serious. During this time, over the last month or two, the Catholic Church has spent $3.5 million in my state of Kansas. Hey, we only have 4 million people in the whole state, and $3.5 million to pass this constitutional amendment. A vote yes was to pass the amendment. A vote no was to abort the amendment, so to speak. And this went on for 2 or 3 months. We've been campaigning on this, and we didn't know which way the wind was going to blow. We were scared shitless that it was going to pass. But on election day, I was sitting in my living room. She was on her computer, and we were watching the results come in. slowly but surely, it looked more and more promising. By the end of the night, the amendment was defeated 59-41. That is a huge, huge statement in one of the most conservative states in the entire United States. But I'm here to tell you that 59-41 was not an accident. It was because a hell of a lot of people got out and worked their butt off. There are counties in western Kansas. If you draw a line right down the middle of Kansas, the whole western part of the state will always vote Republican. The eastern part can be mixed, especially in the high population areas. There were counties in the western part that had 45% of their votes for no against the amendment. Almost all counties, the amendment performed better than Donald Trump. There were counties out there that voted for Donald Trump 75, 78%, and yet the vote no. Well, anyway, there were counties out there that the abortion amendment did better than Donald Trump did, which is super surprising. But it shows people are very concerned about this. Now, I want to close out my opening arguments here by just saying Kansas is just one of 50 states. Kansas is just one of like 212 countries in the world. There's a lot yet to do here with respect to human bodily autonomy, because it's not just reproductive rights, it's LGBTQ rights, it's trans rights, there's all sorts of things that are in danger. And unfortunately, the way the United States goes can sometimes be the way other countries go. And I know that Australia has been infected with some evangelical bullshit. They had an evangelical, as Sasha will say, they had an evangelical prime minister for many years. Anyway, to close this out, this means we've got to be out and active. This is a call to action. The results we saw in Kansas were not an accident. They were the result of a lot of people getting out and doing a lot of work. It's very emotional. It's very important though, because it's not just, it's our kids, it's our grandkids that are going to be affected by much of this. Anyway, I'm going to back off here because we've got 3 other panel members who have got tons more to say. And I'm looking forward to hearing how this all works out and the questions that come in. Thanks, Kara.
Thank you, Dr. Ray. Yeah, that's a great opening and great way to set us up for our conversation this evening. And I think we have a couple of other members of our panel here who would love to talk a little bit more about what we are doing at RfR about this. I hear we have a new task force. Would Helen or Gayle like to speak on that?
I'll jump in right here. Mine won't be quite as personal as Darrel's. Thank you, Darrel, for that kickoff and for helping us bring it home and bring it down to a really personal level. Here at Recovering from Religion, we have week to week at these RfRx's, we share with you our mission statement. It's that we provide hope, healing, and support for folks who are struggling with issues of doubt and non-belief. When the leak dropped in June that Roe might be repealed, Darrel and I immediately had a conversation, and this is kind of a behind the scenes discussion that I want to share with you. Normally, we don't do this very public facing. We have our strategy sessions and we have our volunteer force when they have an idea and we flesh it out and we develop it. But we felt like it was good to let you know what we're doing about this and how we got there. So Darrel and I had an initial conversation. We brought the board in, we had a conversation, and we recognized, because of the nature of religious belief and the role that it's playing in women's reproductive health and the fact that that abortion is going to be impacted, we found ourselves in the position that we recognize that we need to be prepared for this. We need to be prepared for this because if you can use your imagination for just a minute and think of who might be reaching out to us in the days ahead, in the days to come. One of the folks that may be reaching out, I'm about 10 years younger than Darrel, so I'm not quite in that age group, but we may have folks who remember what life was like before Roe v. Wade, before abortion was a guaranteed right in our country, and horrible suffering that took place when people were not assured of having safe and legal abortions. We may have those folks reach out because they're concerned about that, and they're concerned about the impact of religious belief on their personal autonomy. We might have folks like you, folks that are here with us tonight, who are on a journey, some of us at different points in our journey, but who see that bodily autonomy and the civil rights of everyone who can become pregnant, and those who can make them pregnant too. Let's put everybody in the bucket. Can be impacted by people's religious beliefs, because make no mistake, this ruling, this repeal, has everything to do with religious belief. And even the Supreme Court justices who weighed in on the majority opinion, it is transparent that this is what this is about. So we have all kinds of folks who may be reaching out to us. And lastly, we might be contacted by pregnant people, wherever on the spectrum they may fall, because they need some support and they need some help and they don't know where to turn. And recovering from religion, as our opening has said, every time we have an RfRx, we do try to provide resources. We're not trying to get you, the client, or any client who reaches out to us, to come to a conclusion. That's on you. What we want to do is ask you reflective questions, provide some resources, tell you what, where you might find some of those resources, that kind of thing. So in an effort to be prepared for that, we decided to put together a reproductive rights task force. So we have assembled a group. The four that you'll hear from tonight on the panel are on that group. Kyra mentioned that we have Joy US is in the chat. Joy US does not share their face or their identity, so they will be participating in the chat. They're on the panel. We also have another couple of folks who, I don't know if they're in the room with us or not, that are working on securing resources and different ones. But we've put together this panel. We would like to do, we have a couple of objectives, and I'll try to hit kind of the 35,000-foot view of it before I toss this on over to Helen, and she can tell you a little bit more. But we hope to do a social media and a podcast campaign so that folks know that we're here to provide resources. We're here to field those calls and those chats, and to help folks find a support group, or to find a secular therapist, or to be a participant in our online community. So that's one of the things that we want to do. Another thing that we want to do is research the legal liability. This is a big deal. And I'll tell you, as an attorney, I reached out to some law school colleagues who are practicing for all over, but particularly practicing in the states. For example, in Texas, where there is the bounty legislation that's horrible. To understand the liability of not only the organization itself, Recovering from Religion, but our individual agents, our agents who reside in Texas. I don't know if you know this, but to try to summarize it, this bounty legislation allows citizens, if they find someone who has provided any kind of help to an individual who's seeking abortion services, whether that's financial help, an Uber ride, a ride to a safe place, it's support and encouragement. It's the legislation is written in such a way it could be such a large net. Anybody could be involved in that. So what about our agents who are residing in those states where that kind of legislation is in place? What do we do about that? Well, I'll tell you, the answer is we don't know yet. As I reached out to my colleagues, so many folks, it's just so new. This legislation, this repeal, is seismic. We haven't felt it yet because it's only just now beginning. But we have all kinds of potential for legal liability, not just for our agents, but for our organization. So we are researching, what do we do about that? Internally, I'll tell you that we are not cavalier about our volunteers. We care so much about them. We have a handoff system where at any time when a volunteer, a trained agent, takes a call or a chat, most of us come from formerly religious. We come from religious communities. And as well-trained as our volunteers are, we're also human beings. And we may face a call or a chat that hits some triggering issues. And we have a system in place where our agents can say, I need a little help. I need to slip away. And we have a way to do that. Well, this is no exception. And it may not even be a triggering event. It may just simply be that the agent is not comfortable because because of the state in which they reside, to take a call or a chat where they are providing resources for those who are seeking some kind of abortion services. So we're looking to do that. We are pursuing and researching our latest resources. These things are being developed as we speak. The funding for abortion and how we get people across the state to a safe place and how we have accommodations for that and what that's going to look like. So we're researching all of those things. And lastly, we're trying to provide continuing education to our agents so that they can be prepared for that list of folks that I mentioned that may reach out to us. We're trying to craft continuing education so that our agents can have a comprehensive understanding of why it is we believe what we believe. You know, as secular people, you'll hear me say this, not just about this issue, but all of it. It is so empowering for you to have an understanding and an ability to express why you believe what you believe. It's the pride that we have now in being secular people, because when we were religious people, our answer was, well, we believe this because our parents taught us that. Our church taught us that. The Bible says that. And now as secular people, that is not good enough. And it applies here as well. So tonight, and I hope we get to it in some of our discussion, I want to empower you to have an understanding of why this issue is what it is, to be able to make a case, so to speak, lawyer talk, for why it is you believe that women and other people who can become pregnant should have the right to make the decisions about their own health care. So with that, I'm like Darrel, I'm going to try to pass the baton and we'll hear from another one of our panelists. Thank you everyone for being here and for giving us this opportunity to talk about this important topic.
Thank you, Gayle. That is great to hear. I am so glad that we have your leadership on this issue, and I am so excited for the way that RfR is taking this seriously and thinking about these issues, because I know it's really impacting a lot of people. So thank you for that. Helen, I know you've been doing a lot of your ambassadoring lately around this issue. Do you want to fill us in a little bit about what you've been up to and any of your thoughts on this?
Oh yeah, I can do that. So when I found out about this task force was starting, I immediately wanted to get involved, because even though I am past the time of having children, I remember I grew up in the 90s and 2000s. I started becoming sexually active in the 90s, where I volunteered at Planned Parenthood as a teen counselor. I was trained to talk to my fellow teenagers on safe sex, because sometimes it was too intimidating to talk to an adult, and I would hand out condoms and I would be with them. Like if somebody got pregnant, I got to sit with them, you know, with a peer and just hold their hand and just be a support system within the center. And I did that all during my teen years, which was a really big deal for me, especially growing up in a religious household where sex was not talked about. My parents did let me volunteer. They did know what I was doing because they wanted me to make my own choices, but they didn't really understand why I wanted to become involved. And I'm so glad that I did, because I got the sex education that I did. I went on birth control when I became sexually active, and I was able to go to school and have a future because I had access to birth control and I had access to sex education, and those things helped me make informed decisions. And then after I had my children, especially after I had my son, I shut myself down from business. I am spayed like a cat and I can't get pregnant anymore because I had access to reproductive care. And the thing that we are facing now is we are not only facing abortion not being easily accessed to anyone who wants one, but also access to reproductive care. That is another thing we are facing. And those are the things that is deeply, deeply concerning to me. Because if people do not get access to education, reproductive care, and if they need an abortion, we are going to be facing a health crisis that I don't think people have really thought about where we were going to face. And I'm sure those of us that were, now I wasn't there, but because I was born in 77, but the people that were there before Roe v. Wade probably remembers a country where people had to be all sneaky, figuring out whether they're going to have an abortion or illegal abortions, and figuring out what states you could do it, what states you couldn't, and all these different things. And we didn't, and that was the time before the internet. So, you know, and those are things that we are going to be facing again. And I also, my oldest is non-binary, and they have a uterus and are in college. And I cannot imagine if they got pregnant now wanting to create a future for themselves, and they don't want to have children, and being forced to have a baby. Because I live in Florida, DeSantis just fired the attorney general because DeSantis wants to make abortion illegal in the state. And our attorney general was a Democrat. He didn't like the fact that our attorney general was going to defend the state constitution, said that attorney general wasn't doing his job, and fired him. And these are the things that we are facing in the state. So I'm just saying that what we're facing right now is, and I do stand corrected. Thank you, chat. But we are facing but these are the types of things that we are facing, that he is suspended. I'm sorry, fired. Sorry. But regardless of not getting my facts right, and I do apologize for that, but these are the type of things that you're going to slowly see happening throughout the states, is people slowly chipping away at rights within the state. And that slow thing that's going to be happening, because, and that's the thing that scares me. That's why I'm using my voice, because I don't have a lot of political power, obviously. I don't have a law degree, but one thing I do have is my voice, and I'm able to use that voice to talk about these issues and bring them up and say, hey, you have a voice too. You have the ability to be an activist, whether it is, you know, writing your senator, you know, going out to vote, protesting, donating to women's care, reproductive care, whatever it is, you know, that you feel that you can do, you can be a part of the movement in a small way or a big way, however you want to do that. And that's what I'm trying to encourage people to do, to go out and actually do something about it. Because if you just sit on your hands, all these mofos that want to take everybody's rights away are going to take everybody's rights away. And what are you going to do? You're just going to be like, oh, well, you know, it is what it is. Nothing happens. And I know that the wheels of justice move through molasses. It is slow and painful. And I am the type of person that I'm always like, well, I would have liked it yesterday, but I'll take it now because I'm impatient. I have to put on my big girl panties and actually do the work. So my goal by being part of this task force and using my voice and getting the word out as much as possible, directing people to RfR for those resources that we are offering, so they have a resource to go to, and hopefully encourage others to, if not be an activist and get out there and be a voice, but have resources to offer to people that need them or have access to those resources. So if I can say anything tonight about my little jobby job on the part of the Reproductive Rights Task Force, is please find a way that you can help, find a way that you can be an activist, either using your voice or your pocketbook or your vote. Please find a way for you to do these things, because we're not going to get this through this alone, y'all. It's not going to happen. So that's my shtick.
Yeah, thank you for that, Helen. And I know you have definitely been busy getting out there and using your voice lately and spreading the word and being active. And we so appreciate that. And I have a feeling we're probably going to share some links to some of the things you've done later this evening too. So thank you for being active and doing all of those things that you have advised us to engage in as well. Now, we have not yet heard from David, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this. I know you are a practicing therapist right now, and you mentioned that you have been hearing people are impacted by this decision. Can you talk a little bit about the ways that this decision has impacted people?
Yeah, no, it's impacted. I mean, I have one of my primary populations I work with is those suffering from religious abuse and religious trauma generally. So, I work on the, therapy side, I work on the coaching side, depending on where the person is and the degree of help that they're looking for. And so, many of the clients, these right now are showing up not only as reflecting on what does this mean, concerning their own ethics, because in some ways, what the Supreme Court did was put it right back into people's laps as to what do you actually mean when you say this. You can no longer just simply mouth these platitudes or virtue signal to your particular group. You literally have to stand up and say with your feet, with your voice, with your vote, what it is that this really means for you. And the number of personal stories coming out now, I believe actually, Kara, it was you or Helen, maybe both of you actually, were noting that one of the biggest differences between now and when Roe v. Wade happened is, well, the internet. I mean, we already had plenty of stories breaking out about, Lysol, being used for as an abortifacient. There's of course the coat hanger stories, and by stories I do not mean to diminish what was going on. It's what was going on, and we had these experiences being reported, but the notion of going viral, as much as I have certain issues with that whole thing, it still serves a really good purpose when it gets the issues out there, and so people can no longer just simply say, well, I'm pro or I'm against. We now have to start dealing with the nuances of what does it mean in practice, and it's messy already, and it's going to hurt a lot of people. And so without getting too further down that path, coming back to the people showing up, and so people are questioning a lot of their ethics. They're questioning their own history with their religious faith, the degree to which this plays a role. I have people who are still labeling themselves and believing themselves within Christian traditions, totally fine, who are going, this is not the faith that I signed up for. What is this? How does this work out? To women in general going, how does this work regardless of their potential lived experience within having pregnant, being pregnant at all. It also then touches on, like I said, reproductive issues because of the subtleties, because of the nuances of how this pans out in medical practices. So yeah, lots of discussions. I have to say, I mean, the first day the ruling came out, I probably had almost 2 full days of nothing but just holding space for tears. Like it was just, there was no, the work was simply holding space because it was such a, slap in the face, felt as such. And so the continued help that is being needed. And I've already seen, cases where the wording around abortion has started being changed. People are not referring to it anymore. They're referring to it as, well, I had a medically necessary procedure or something similar. So that I think it's due to, the fear, legitimate or not, we don't quite know yet. But it's a real concern over records being subpoenaed and so on being put out there as to whether or not, you've declared that you've had one or are seeking one. And so there's a lot of uncertainty. And so to kind of wrap this up, sorry, is to kind of put it into that context of just holding that space then for that uncertainty and going, yes, we don't really know how all of this is going to, play out. And that in and of itself is leading to a rise in anxiety and also depression and just questions around, what are we going to do moving forward?
Wow, that's really telling that already in such a short amount of time, it sounds like there's been a noticeable impact on the language that people are even able to use to describe their experience and the things that they're going through. That's very troubling to me. Thank you for pointing that out. And, I want to throw that question out to the rest of the panel too, in case anybody else would like to speak on how this decision has impacted you or other people that you know, or any coping skills or strategies that you've been thinking about lately.
Well, it hadn't affected me in this way, but we can already see that the ability to get medication across state lines, specifically abortive kinds of things, the day after pill and the week-long or whatever, the 5-day pill and other things. States are trying to enforce rules and regulations on just what you get in the mail. Well, that's interesting, because that's what it used to be like many years ago. If you sent pornography across a state line, you get prosecuted for it. Well, this is kind of states trying to enforce national level across state boundaries, and we're going to see this. And when you look at birth control, there are states that are. When I was a kid at 1963, my mother, I had four brothers, but my mother was just elated when the pill was invented, and she was one of the first women in the United States to get the pill. I think she loved that. My mother loved sex. She may have been a fundamentalist Christian, but she loved sex, and getting that pill was just so wonderful for her. But she had to get her husband's permission, and she had to have a discussion with the doctor, and there were regulations around getting a pill. Now, 7 or 8 years later, my mother is a foster mother. My parents were foster parents for many years, and she gets a teenage girl in the house who is incredibly sexually interested in. She was taken away from her mother because she was out of control in many ways. And all my mother wanted to do was go get her birth control because she didn't want this girl to get pregnant. And she couldn't get, because she wasn't married. You couldn't, at one point in time, I think it was I can't remember, but at least in 1967, 68, a teenage girl, nobody could get birth control unless you were married in the state of Kansas. It was that simple. And there are states that want to go back to that. There are politicians that want to go back to that. So anyway, there's lots of things. I got nieces, nephews, and grandkids that are going to be affected by this because they're not getting good sex education, and they can't get proper medical information or health care through their own doctor. Doctors in Texas are going to be scared shitless to talk to somebody about abortion or birth control, or may already be. I don't know, Gayle, maybe you can talk to that issue.
Well, I think that David's point was so precise. We just don't know what's going to shake out with this. We can imagine and we can speculate what's going to happen. And these are all scenarios that are not far-fetched, all of these. And in fact, the 10-year-old child who needed to cross the state line in order to get an abortion, so that because she had been raped, and the whole other side was saying, oh, it's made up. That doesn't really happen. And those of us on our side are screaming, this is exactly what happens. And the problem with the restriction is, even with these, it's one of those things where the exceptions for rape or incest, well, that's better than nothing, but we don't want to be too in favor of that, because it puts the onus back on the person. You have to have been violated in order to be able to receive this kind of thing. So there's a that's a double-edged sword to say, oh, well, we're grateful for that, but at the same time, that's not a good position to take. And so I think that's exactly what is behind the creation of the task force, is to, I use a little bit of graphic language when we're talking with the task force, that we need to be in a crouch. We need to be ready. We need to be prepared for what kind of calls are going to come in, because as David said, if someone tells you they know what's going down and how this is going to shake out, they do not know. None of us know. We don't. It's, to me, it is so unsustainable what we have right now. This is absolutely unsustainable. This Texas bounty thing, unsustainable. You can't possibly have enough law enforcement, enough judicial staff. You can't possibly enforce this. And then something like this ban across state travel, it's out. You know how many airplanes leave cities every day with people who can become pregnant, and do you have to produce a false pregnancy test in order to do it? It's unsustainable. But having said that, so what is that going to look like? We know exactly what it's going to look like. It means lower income people, people of color, BIPOC, all of these folks who have less resources are going to be the folks that are most affected by it, as it always is in a capitalist society. Those at the bottom that experience the most financial hardship are going to be impacted first. So we already know that's coming, but how it's going to shake out, we just need to be prepared for. Just about anything that you can imagine is possible to happen with this. So Kara, I appreciate the question, how has this affected us? It's affected me by getting lost in my own head on how many people, how much suffering this can create in the lives of everybody that's going to be affected by this. So I don't know if the other panelists want to say something, or if you have another topic, but it's in the early enough stages that we have no idea exactly the impact that this is going to have.
I wanted to piggyback off of something Darrel said about Texas. In May of 2020, so this was right before Roe versus Wade got turned over, there was a woman in Texas, and her baby had died in her womb, and she needed to have an abortion to get the fetus removed. The hospital that she was trying to go to would not remove the fetus, because they kept stating that, well, you're not at life threat anymore, at that level yet. And basically she had to become septic for them to remove an unviable fetus. And this was before RV Wade got turned over. Because that line of when is a mother's life in danger is hard to determine. What kind of, because who's setting the law? Are doctors saying what this is? Are lawyers saying what this is? Are politicians saying what this is? Because that's what we're looking at. And it was not because the hospital didn't want to do it. They knew that this fetus was not viable. It was not going to survive. It was already starting to die. And they were like, no, we can't do anything, because she had to have certain symptoms. Basically, she had to have a fever. She was already bleeding, and she's already had other issues, but it was the fact that she had to become septic before they would remove the fetus. What the hell is that? And that's what's so scary about all of this, because people are like, oh, it's a life threat, and I'm not talking about people here, but people are like, oh, it's a life threat to the mom. What is that line? And then also, is that going to cause irreparable harm to the mother, maybe long-term? We don't know the long-term consequences of these decisions on the impact of the person that's being affected by it. And that's what's really, really scary.
This is a healthcare issue. I mean, what you just said, Helen, is some people would say that's an extreme example, but it's not, because it's extreme, yeah, but I live 6 miles away from the closest hospital, and it's a Catholic hospital, and is supported in Medicare and Medicaid. Federal funds go to this hospital. And yet if a woman went in there with an ectopic pregnancy that she had to have dealt with, or she needed her tubes tied, or any other normal health care, they have the right on religious grounds, using taxpayer dollars, to refuse that. And then she has to get in an ambulance or get in her own car or whatever and go to another hospital, a state hospital, where they might or might not do that because, we're a Republican state. I'm not sure if they can or not. So it's a healthcare issue that's much bigger than a 10-year-old getting raped and needing an abortion. I mean, we all agree that hopefully that's rare. And somebody, whether they're septic or not, hopefully that's rare. But for every one of those, there's 1,000 other women who are having difficult issues that are become life-threatening if they don't get them taken care of. It may not look serious now, but it can have life-changing consequences.
Yeah, that is just really scary to me. And the idea that this position would be called pro-life when what's written into law is that people's lives have to be put in danger in order to even receive health care. That doesn't sound like pro-life to me. That's kind of terrifying. Ugh. Okay, well, I want to go back to another point that we talked a little bit about earlier, but I want to come back to this and see if y'all would like to comment a little more on this. At Recovering from Religion, obviously our focus is on, helping people who are dealing with, religious related issues. So I'm wondering if any of y'all would like to expand on how you understand this decision and the related healthcare access issues that it's connected to in relation to religion and religious fundamentalism. Like, obviously, we don't just get involved in politics here to be in politics. We offer our services to everyone who's dealing with religious issues. So what is it about this issue that it really strikes you as this is a religious issue, not necessarily a political one? How do we speak to that?
I'll start, but I sure want to hear from the other panelists, and I'll try to be brief. I think what hangs up the religious community is the concept of a soul, this idea that there is a piece of us that's separate from our physical self, that after our death, we have this nebulous, ethereal thing with our memories and some part of our personality that's when you believe that, and you believe that something survives your death and then it goes on to do something else, live on another plane. And they would use much simpler language than I'm trying to use. They would say you have a soul, and when you die and you go to heaven. If you believe that, and this whole concept that life begins at conception, that this idea of a soul inhabits this blastocyst at conception, that's their dividing line. And once there is a soul, instead of us seeing, this is a collection of dividing cells. There is no central nervous system. There's no survival outside of the womb. We see it in a rational, scientific manner. And of course, we value the adult person inside whose body this blastocyst is. And so overcoming that obstacle of there being a soul, that's their sticking point. That's why this is a religious issue. And the idea that the language about life begins at conception, I don't know if we have any of our guests come from the Jewish faith, the Jewish religion. Jewish religion says life begins at first birth. So there's all kinds of religious ideas about, when life begins. I tend to think that that's framing things in their terms. And I think that we get sometimes caught up in that argument. I think it's a difficult argument to make, but that's not the relevant argument. I believe, and I even say this, I call this a red herring. I think that that's irrelevant. What is relevant is another person cannot use your body without your consent. It doesn't matter if it's a fetus that originated with my egg, if it's a fetus that originated with your egg. They can't transplant your fetus into my body without my consent, because I happen to be able to have a uterus and can carry this to term. We don't do that. If I have a blood type that can save another person, even if it's not inconvenient for me, I'm not forced to do that. Even if you think that's morally repugnant, that I wouldn't lie on a table enough to donate blood to save another person's life, in this country, we support autonomy and consent. And this is what this are, in my opinion, this is what this argument is about. It's, we don't allow that. It doesn't matter if it doesn't matter the age of the person. It doesn't matter the value of the person. You just can't use my body without my consent. It doesn't even matter if it's my own egg. If I don't consent to it, then I have the right to be able to make choices on my own. That is so contrary to this life begins at conception. There's this soul present as at the moment that the sperm and egg connect, that I think that's where this is why I think this is where religion gets stuck on this and can't seem to overcome itself because of that very thing. But I do want to hear from the other panelists and even in the chat to hear more input and more discussion about that.
I think, Gayle, you bring up a good point concerning one, because this is really, so much of this does boil down to how is life conceptualized? What is and what is the kind of measuring stick? And that's going to come back to ideology. And there've been some really great quotes provided in the chat previously that show that even evangelicals have not had this this corner this issue cornered for all time. I mean, we literally have, where back in the late 60s, early 70s, not really big a deal, even by people who were at the upper ends of their movement. So it's as elsewhere noted as well, it's like religion is like any worldview or ideology. It's a means of organizing what we consider experience for the purposes of making sense to any of us. That's why we have political ideologies. It's why we have ideas concerning family and so on and so forth. Even the notion of a self is a organizing principle. Won't keep going there. But anyway, the whole idea here is that we have these systems in place in order to try to make sense of what is complicated. And I've spoken before about what fundamentalism is not necessarily tied to religion per se, because there are definitely fundamentalist political ideologies, because at core, I follow in the footsteps of thinkers like Erich Fromm and others who note that just at a biological level, human beings are really poor at supporting freedom. we really like to give up ourselves to authority figures and structures and so on. It's just our proclivities, and we just happen to be okay if it's the authority that agrees with us. So part of the issue here is that and one reason why, when it even comes to the Dobbs decision, that as much as I on one level disagree with it, on another level, even though the ramifications of it are already being felt, even though doctors haven't been prosecuted quite yet on under the new stuff, even though there's a lot of questions around it, decisions are being made. Women's medical rights or medical procedures and care is being shifted because there's a big fat set of question marks now, and people are rightly concerned over how this is all going to shake out. And so in that way, more in line with Ginsburg and Alito. Even, in fact, I recently read an article in which the irony here is that Alito quoted Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and yet she in fact may end up having the last laugh, because he quoted her noting that the Roe v. Wade decision seemed to, and there's a debate over this, but I think at least there was a variable in it of stopping the evolution of this as a cultural debate in America. It created sides that people could just simply make up plaques and make up signs and never actually talk to one another. And so what we had is basically 50 years of people lobbing, platitudes at one another without really getting into the muck of what this really meant in practice. And as much as this is going to be awful, and really wish this did not have to happen, but unfortunately history is just replete with lives being lost and hurt as we try to figure out how these things work in practice. But now we actually have this. We have the capacity to be able to go, guess what? This is brutal. This is in your face. This is, if we get to the activism question, and we need these, these stories being told. I mean, that was the power of the Me Too movement, was stories literally being put out there and going, listen, people, this is not just some kind of, statement of, oh, well, that's just another, she didn't like being, complimented, kind of dismissiveness that was often being put out there. Same thing here, where it's like, oh, well, the people who want an abortion are just those that, don't want to deal with babies. No, that's literally not true. That's just not how, most of these things. In fact, I'll share the article, but it was going through the, pulling around people's ideas of, like, most people don't understand what 42% of unplanned pregnancies end in abortion, that the vast majority happen in the first 6 weeks. This is not that. In fact, there's also a majority in which they occur by parents who already have kids. So they're not, the idea that that abortion is being used as as a way of birth control is simply a caricature that's not generally true. And now we have the time to be able to really, put that forward, even in Indiana. So you have, Kansas happened, and now you have Indiana's law, which is, from what I gather, they're the first, state to truly, ban, which they went against their previous law, which was that you could have an abortion up to, I think it was 20 weeks previous, and they've undone that. But even then, there was a minority that wanted no qualifications whatsoever on this law, and they couldn't do it. So yes, there's a concern over how this is going to get implemented, but even the law itself, they had to put in okay, so there are qualifications for, the life of the mother, and when the fetus, is already unviable, and so on and so forth. So when it actually came to putting these things into practice, even the diehards had to go, well, we actually kind of have to put these things in there, because otherwise we're not going to be able to do this. So, this is all going to start getting, washed out, and all the more so for us to be active in having the conversations and being honest about how this is actually working out, and getting past the slogans, and really start having, for that matter, have like half a dozen examples of actual people who point out that this is not a simple thing of, conception equals life. Like, ectopic pregnancies is probably one of my favorite, examples. How does this actually work? Or what was it? Somebody else had noted that there's now, we've been able to create a fetus in, it obviously wasn't a human one, but it was a different animal, without the utilization of sperm and egg. Okay. Suddenly these questions are going to get a whole lot more complicated, and we should actually celebrate those complications, because it makes the simplicities difficult to put into law. Anyway.
Kind of piggyback off of that. I also want to point out that when you get into conversations with people, especially the pro-life people, you're going to get into a lot of straw manning. and they want to lure you into arguments that are good. You're going to be arguing about like philosophy, and you're going to be arguing about like, when is the fetus viable? And well, are you going to abort a baby within like the 3rd trimester, you know, and decide you don't want it anymore? Because they want to engage you in those conversations, because they want to ignore what you're actually talking about. Because you'll hear there's a lot of emotional language that are used in this conversation, that you're killing babies, you know, women are murder, you know, we're murderers and blah, blah, blah. You have to ignore that. And I know the natural instinct is to get defensive and being like, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about, and you start yelling. It's not going to go well. I am telling you, because they want you to get emotional. They want you to become irrational, because they're using straw manning emotional arguments to draw you into a false narrative of what is going on. And like David said, actually have real stories about real people that have been through this issue. It's even better if you have a religious person that went through an abortion and was pro-life and then was backed up against the wall. And guess what? They had to have an abortion because guess what? Having a kid was not a good idea at the time, or something really terrible happened to them. And they had to do it because, you know, I wouldn't want to have the person that caused me trauma's baby. Wouldn't want to do that. So, you know, these are the type of conversations that you have to kind of be prepared for. And also, too, if you don't want to get drawn into an argumentative narrative, don't. Be like, this is too emotional, this is too close, it's not going to go well, and know when to walk away. But if you do try to engage in these arguments, these straw mans, make sure that you have your steel man ready, because they will try to knock you down with emotional languages and using words that are going to cause anger and frustration to rise up in you. You got to be aware of those things, because I've gotten into those conversations and then I ended up crying and screaming at the end of it because I was all angry and mad, and I totally lost the point of why I was having the conversation in the beginning. So you have to kind of go in knowing this of what this actually is. And also too, that you can appeal to someone's empathy. Like the people that are pro-life, they actually do care. They do care about children. They do care about these things. It's just the message got twisted along the way. So a good idea is to appeal to their empathy, appeal to what would they want for their own children, what ideally they would like to see for others, you know, and people that are facing these decisions. You know, citing facts is helpful, but I'm always go with the person's humanity, because you're going to turn them over into that perspective easier than citing facts. You know, I'm talking about laws and all that type of stuff. You want to bring it down to the personal and get them to think about, what would you do? What would you do if this was your child? What would you, you know, and get them to start to think about it on a more personal level, despite what their religious beliefs have told them. Because everybody along the lines, when you're religious or not, and you thought that you had a certain ideology and you thought there was a certain way that you were going to be, and then when push came to shove, you made a different decision than what you thought that you would have. And that's where you want to get people to kind of think about the argument from that perspective.
Yeah, those are really good points, Helen. And that's actually a great segue kind of into probably the last topic that we'll have time to talk about this evening, getting close to the end of our time here. But I would like to hear from y'all about, you know, given all of the information and the impacts that you've all described this evening, how does this situation impact your work or your activism, or even just, you know, any of our responsibilities to one another as human beings? What do y'all have any further thoughts on that? I know you've already discussed a little bit about the Reproductive Rights Task Force, but is there any more you want to say on any of those things?
I agree with Gayle there in the chat. Absolutely vote. I mean,
Yeah, vote. Please vote.
You know, please vote. Please go out. And you know, part of the, conversation here is, in which also noted, and I agree with the comment back about productive dialogue, and absolutely, but I will poke a little bit and note that often when we discuss, productive dialogue, is that we are using productive as a, and I'm not saying this person is saying that, but often when I hear it, is that it's, it's productive in the sense of, well, what they really mean is at the end, this person agrees with me. And, it's like, it's a directional dialogue that is often what is wanted. And I would, say that that's actually not what I want. If any, it's one of the reasons why, tend to be a free speech almost absolutist, is, fall into line with Jonathan Haidt's notion of, no, you know why I want, free speech to be just fully out there? Because I actually want to know what people think. Anytime we, give space for, platitudes, anytime we give people cover for not being able to say what they think, we are effectively hiding from the capacity for people to be challenged, for new ideas to take root, that the nuances of how things actually work in practice. I mean, it's one reason why, as much as I disagree with philosophically, most particularly dualistic, religious ideas, is that there is not a one-to-one relationship between an idea and a particular behavior. We like to think so. We're like, well, this behavior was caused by that. No, it just doesn't work out that way. We like to, make post hoc rationalizations and make a story up as to why we did this, but we do things all the time that are against one or another idea that we may have at another point. Why? Because life is freaking complicated. It's really, really difficult. And we want actually that to be front and center. Life is hard. It is difficult. It is not easy. It is not something that you can just simply, go to a singular book and go, hey, this is all that matters. It requires conversation. It requires being uncomfortable, and it requires the humility to go, you know what, it might be wrong. And that allows us to, have this. And that's the issue then that comes back to the, healthcare issue, is going, hey, what? It might be wrong. And it's a good thing to be a little more honest about that and not hide behind, an authority figure or structure in order to give yourself a carte blanche away from it.
Yeah, good points. And, before we wrap up and go to questions, which we have a whole slew of, are there any final comments or anything that y'all would like to leave us with, including any links or resources or any place that you would like to refer people to for more information or support?
Yeah, I want to put in a plug for our resources tab. If you go to recoveringfromreligion.org, and we'll put these links in the chat from time to time, and you click on our resources and you specifically go to abortion, you'll find that that's cross-referenced, where we have a flood of resources. We're looking at new resources all the time. That will be helpful for you to have our agents try to familiarize themselves with that, so that they're prepared, with knowing what kind of resources that we can offer. And those, as I said, those are a real work in progress right now. I don't know if you followed politics wise, when Congressman Matt Gaetz took on a young Latina teenager and she's an activist and she's 19. So that teenager is, we've played that up a little bit because he came at her, and she has since raised over $2 million for abortion, for $2 million for abortion services. And so that's brand new. That just happened in the last couple of weeks. So this thing is organic. It has its own pace. And so check back with us from time to time on the resources. And We'll try to keep our website updated. Someone put in the chat, and I'm grateful for that. I think Rob did that. We have a statement. Recovering from Religion has a statement on our position about that. So you might look at that. That's a real high level statement. And then you can do a little deeper dive by checking out some of the resources that we have. So don't forget to do that.
Also too, in your LC, make sure you know what the exact law is and what is coming up and things to keep an eye on, because it does change. It changed here, and it's changing across the state, and what new amendments they want to add to that law, to sneak things in, because they're sneaky little buggers. So make sure you know exactly how the law is written and what it's going through and what exactly people are voting on. And if it looks confusing, it's intentional. I'm sure Dr. Darrel Ray can talk about how they used different wording in the vote in Kansas, deliberately to confuse people.
Yeah, the pro-life group used the word vote yes to give women choice, when in fact that was the opposite. And fortunately it didn't fool, if it fooled anybody, it didn't fool very many, because 59% voted no anyway. But yeah, they were using the exact same language to say the opposite of what they really meant. The Catholic Church is right in the middle of it. And anyway, $3.5 million to confuse people is what it amounted to.
Yeah, so that's the only thing, is like really understand the law. If this is something you are voting on, to really understand it before you vote on it, because they're tricky, sneaky bastards. You know, so become well educated on what's going on in your state and what's coming up for the vote. And also look up like who was running for your local school board, because again, you know, these people are going to be passing laws, and your local government affects you more than the national. So please make sure you know what's going on, even within your own county. And that's it. I'm going to get off my soapbox now.
And the local school boards are dominated by conservative Republicans, are trying to get books out of schools that might educate kids. Good sex education cannot be found in school libraries. It's the Republicans have anything to do with it.
Correct. Agreed.
Fair enough.
And also, if you want to get involved, please volunteer. We would like help. We like help. So if you would like to get involved, you know, go to our volunteer page on the website, fill out an application, say, hey, I want to get involved and kick some butt. So, and be 20% cooler. So join our task force, people, or just join Recovering from Religion and be 20% cooler, because that's the goal. You want to be like me. So,
it works, y'all. I'm definitely cooler because
that's right. I make you cooler.
All right. Well, thank you all for all of your comments and your insights on this. This is such an important topic, and I'm really glad we got to have this conversation this evening. And we're not done talking about it yet. We have a whole big bunch of questions that we'll try and get through as many of them as we can. We may not get to all of them, but hold tight. We'll do our best. But let's see, and I'll just put these, questions to the panel. Whoever wants to speak on each one, please feel free to do that. So one that we got is a little bit of a historical question, but I think it speaks to some of the topics we talked about earlier. Someone was wondering, what was the motivation behind the whole anti-choice / pro-life movement that started in the 1970s? Like, what changed? How did we get here? Does anybody have the history on that they'd like to share?
I can say a little bit about it, but there may be other people know more. Basically, the evangelicals got together, political evangelicals, because they weren't happy with the way the culture was going. Remember, the 60s were pretty open and liberal, and a lot of positive things happened, like civil rights, like women's rights, like the ERA, a constitutional amendment that came real close to passing. And they didn't like any of that, because patriarchal religions want to keep control of your sexuality and and women. That's the main focus of patriarchal religions. They got together, tried to figure out what would work. There's a lot of things they looked at, but they came to the conclusion, this is in the early 70s with people like Jerry Falwell, and they came to the conclusion that abortion might be the place to focus. And as you know, if you've read my book, The God Virus, religions are always testing. It's like, I know, David, you don't like going viral as a term, but I do, obviously. That virus that we got, the COVID, is constantly testing the environment. It's constantly trying to find a way to overcome your immune system and break out. So you've heard about the notion of breakout infections. Well, that's what we had in the abortion. They found the weak spot in our culture, and there was a breakout infection. It's over the last 40 years. So that's why it succeeded. Their religion is like a virus. It's got to replicate itself. It's got to get from my brain to your brain. So it's constantly looking for the weak spots in our culture. I mean, the title of my book is How Religion Infects Our Mind, Lives, and Culture, because that's what's happening here. And it's just a story that's been going on for thousands of years. Every religion has to do it. We're just seeing it before our very eyes. The mutation of the organism we call religion, it's a parasite, and it goes from one brain to the next brain. If you look at it from those perspectives, you can see that, wow, the evangelicals found something, succeeded, and they're sticking with it all the way to the Supreme Court. And that was their goal. And they've now achieved their goal.
Yeah, oh, you're right. I know a lot of people who were single issue voters for just that reason, and they got together and they got what they wanted. So along those lines, several people have asked questions, kind of along the lines of, well, what do we say when people argue back that, oh, this isn't religious at all, you're being political? And for example, some people saying, well, the Dobbs ruling doesn't specifically say that they overturned Roe because of religion. So how do you argue that? What do you say to people?
I would pose a question, then tell me how it's not religious. When 5 out of the 6 justices that voted for it were Catholic, and one's a lapsed Catholic. That sounds religious to me. So I don't understand how it cannot be religiously motivated or sexist motivated, because it affects people with uteruses. I'm not to disparage, my LGBTQ plus friends. I'm not, but I'm just saying that the majority of the people that it's affect is women. But it's also queer bias. It's sexist and queerist, and it's stupid and dumb because it's religiously motivated. Because religion wants us to be broodmares. I have to stay at home, make sandwiches, and pop out babies so I can make more Christians to go find this religious war that doesn't exist and create more of them. That is the goal. So explain to me how it is not a religious movement, because even people that are religious, this is only 18% of the country that is completely pro-life. The rest didn't want to see this overturned, believes in the people's ability, the right to choose. So why are only 18% of the religious people that are pro-life dictating the laws for everybody else? I want to know, because if you have a good argument for this, I would like to hear it. That it's not religiously motivated.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Well, I mean, I will note that yes, about 18% or so are de facto, against abortion at all. That being said, depending on when you pose the question as to when abortion occurs, you get a lot more nuance. I mean, simply asking, did you want Roe v. Wade overturned or not? Sure. I mean, you had about 57% or so, they were saying, no, let's not, overturn it. But when you ask, well, wait a minute, when, what are you okay with when it comes down to, at what point? And part of this, gets crazy, because when you then drill down even further, because people haven't had to think about it very much. It was a law. So why do I have to think about it? Like, I'm either pro or against, blah, blah, blah. What does it matter? And so, it gets a little tricky, but at the same time, it's rather broad in Europe, for almost everywhere, that broadly speaking, up until about 12 weeks, most, relatively speaking, are, there is a majority that are like, nope, regardless of what's happening, they're relatively okay with abortion. You start going past 12 weeks to about 20, and people start getting really hazy. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Part of it's religion, obviously. I mean, there are issues related to, I want to be very careful here because I keep using the term religion. And religion is not a carte blanche term here. There are any number of religious people of various traditions. We've mentioned Judaism, we've mentioned any number. There are even evangelicals that have absolutely no problem, with this. Obviously, they didn't have much, as a group, they didn't have much problem, 60 years ago. So, this is a, very specific line of ideology that is having an issue. But even then, secular people will come down on this in very different ways. And part of it does come down to that question of viability. It just does. I mean, the issue of what is life actually is a question we're constantly in, because we're literally looking for it in other planets. So we actually do want to know what the definition of it is. And so when does life start is actually a derivation of that question. It's in, what do we mean by it? I don't know. There's the debate, there's the question. And so, of course, now every time I ask this, I can't help but think of Monty Python and Every Sperm is Sacred song. But it is, a question to, start, for those that aren't just using it as a way of hiding the fact that really what it is just, soul came in at inception, then, we do want, because we have issues around autonomy all over the place. Legally speaking, you really can't just do anything you want with your body, no matter the circumstances. And the rub is figuring out what those limits are. And that's why we have debate about it. It's figuring that out.
And I also want to point out, I don't want to vilify people that are pro-life, because they have come to this decision, maybe not for the best reasons, but to them they were good reasons, and I don't want to vilify them, because that is taking away from them what the real issue is. And it's just the ability for people to make their own choices about their lives and their healthcare. That is it. That's what we're getting down to. And if we start not seeing the forest from the trees, that's when things get messy. That's when we start not seeing people as people, and we start just seeing them as a symbol of the thing that you are against me. You are the symbol of the thing that I don't like, because again, I've been guilty of this type of stuff, and I'm trying to learn to be a better person, because I understand that because obviously I volunteer for this organization, and people have been indoctrinated. And when you've been indoctrinated, it takes a lot to change people's minds. The only difference is that the government is telling us what to do and not to do with our bodies. And I feel a little prickly about that. So I understand the anger and the frustration, and we want to loop everybody in, and it does get nuanced and weird. And I don't have answers for all the questions. I contemplate this stuff all the time. But when it comes down to brass tacks, I cannot tell somebody else what to do with their own body and what they need for their life. That is it. And I don't think anybody else should tell another person what they need for their life and what's good for them. And that's it. That's it. Done.
Excellent, thank you. And that segues into another question that someone was wondering about, which is, we've talked a lot about, activism and voting and things people can do to support others, and those are all good things. Someone else was wondering, have any of y'all tried using street epistemology with pro-life supporters? And do you find that that is a helpful way to have these conversations with people?
I have not, but I would be interested if someone has. I think it lends itself to it. This is such a volatile issue. I would be interested to know if that could work. You know, how did you, all of the pieces of street epistemology on identifying what we're talking about, and how did you arrive at your views? And then could it be anything, wonderful things, but I haven't done it personally. So maybe in the informal chat time, if someone has used that and had that kind of discussion, they could share it with us.
All right, then, hearing no objections, let's move on. We'll get ready to wrap up, and then we will go into the Hangout. So thank you all so much for being here to have this really important conversation this evening. I learned a lot. It was really good getting to hear so many different perspectives on this, and to get to hear so much in the chat as well. So thank you, everybody else who was participating in the conversation there too. And
Kara,
also thank you.
I'd just like to say thanks to our resource director who put some cool quotes up there. I was some of them I wasn't even aware of. That's great. Thanks. Thanks.
I
Dan.
wasn't either. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah,
I've been
thank
looking for those quotes. I copied them, so thank you. That was great.
Yeah.
I knew they existed.
we have the best resource director on the planet, the Smithsonian. We're trying to keep the Smithsonian from stealing them from us, so be careful.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah, that was a wealth of information. So if you missed it, scroll back up in the chat. And also thank you to our amazing and wonderful troll stompers and hangout hosts and everybody else who is here helping us out. So thank you everyone for participating in this. It is a team effort here. Okay, we are not done with this conversation. As it happens, RfRx is going to be back again next week, and David Teachout is going to be back again next week. And he is going to be continuing the conversation about reproductive health issues. Specifically, he's going to present to us about some of the effects of abortion and abortion policies from a psychological perspective. So we'll be hearing more of a deep dive on that next week. So we are going to still be having some of these same conversations, but a little bit more from a psychological perspective. So come back again with your excellent questions next week. I am looking forward to that one as well. Okay, so speaking of which, all of our previous recordings can be found on our YouTube channel, which I'm going to drop in the link. And if you have questions, comments, inquiries, death threats, send them to me, RfRx at recoveringfromreligion.org. And don't forget about our blog and our podcast, which we mentioned earlier. I'm going to throw those in the chat too. And follow us on the social medias. It really helps us if you give us a like or a follow or a subscribe or whatever the case may be. And I just put that into the wrong chat. Let me try that again. There we go. And it helps us, connect with more people, and it helps more people connect with us who may be able to benefit from some of the services that we provide. So check us out on the Facebook, the Twitter, the Instagram, the TikTok. All the links are here in the chat for you, whichever platform you like to use the best. Check us out. We're on there. And if you would like to hear even more things from us, sign up for our newsletter. Get some news, get our newest resources, recently published videos, blog posts, things like that. You can get notifications for those if you sign up for that newsletter that comes out every so often. If you want to have more emails come into your inbox, you can get them. We have them. So sign up for that. And finally, you have been hearing from us all evening, and we would like to also hear from you. We have a feedback poll that we'll launch here in just a second that will inquire about how you found this program. Was it relevant to you? Those sorts of things. That feedback gives us some great information to make sure that we're putting out information and resources that people are finding useful. So feel free to fill that out while we wrap up. And we are now going to wrap up, and I'm going to bring back Dr. Darrel Ray to sum up for us. You have any final words and closing thoughts for us this evening before we go to the Hangout?
Yes and no. I don't have a lot to say, but I just will say thanks a lot to the Kara for hosting all this, and thanks for the panel for all that you contributed. And definitely thanks to Joy US for taking on the role of being the coordinator and manager for leader for the task force, because it's no small piece of work, and she's put together quite a good team already. We did this, as Gayle said earlier, we did this because we're concerned that our people who come to us for help are going to be impacted by this. I just hope you will let people know about Recovery from Religion and our services, and let them know we don't care where you are in the political spectrum or the religious spectrum. We're here to listen to you, help you sort your own issues through in your own time. And it's done with trained professionals. But if you feel you need some help, if you are a pregnant person, if you know somebody who's a pregnant person or could be, and they need help, we will connect them to resources. We're not going to provide medical advice, of course, but we'll help you connect to resources. It's not it's a focus for us because abortion is a religious concept. We don't talk about aborting a rabbit fetus. We don't talk about aborting a horse fetus. It's a part of what we do, and nature does. So it's a notion that comes directly from religion, and we're all about how religion harms people. And this one has done a big number on people. The guilt and shame and the horrible suffering that people have experienced over the last hundreds of years because of this notion about abortion and religion. Anyway, if you want to volunteer, we've already talked about that a bit. Hit the volunteer button. If you'd like to donate to help us support us in what we're doing, please hit the donate button. And thanks for coming tonight. Back to you, Kara.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Ray. Yeah, excellent closing points. And yeah, I absolutely appreciate everybody who showed up to engage this evening.